In August 1864, a year after the Emancipation Proclamation, Annie Davis, an enslaved woman from Maryland, wrote to then-President Abraham Lincoln asking for clarification on whether she was free or not. This was so that she could visit her family, but her slaveholder forbade her from leaving. The letter reads as follows: Mr. President, it is my desire to be free, to go see my people on the eastern shore. My mistress won't let me. Will you please let me know if we are free and what I can do? I write to you for advice. Please send me word this week or as soon as possible and oblige. Annie Davis. It's important to know that slavery persisted in Maryland and certain other Union-controlled states even after the 1863 Emancipation Proclamation. And this was due to specific political reasons. The Emancipation Proclamation issued by President Lincoln applied exclusively to territories under Confederate control. However, it intentionally exempted Union-controlled states such as Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, and Missouri, as well as Union-occupied Confederate states. This was because Lincoln sought to maintain the loyalty of Union border states during the Civil War. So this means that if Annie Davis would have received a reply letter from Lincoln, she would have just confirmed a great disappointment that she wasn't yet free. Slavery in Maryland, where Annie Davis lived, officially ended on November 1st, 1864, when a new state constitution was adopted. This was almost 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was first signed. This Maryland Constitution explicitly outlawed slavery, completing a process of abolition within that state. Similarly, other Union states and newly established Union territories abolished slavery at different times. Missouri, for example, abolished slavery in January 1865. Tennessee, a Union-occupied Confederate state, abolished slavery around that same time. And nationally, slavery was fully outlawed in December 1865 with the ratification of the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Now, Juneteenth gets its name from combining the words June and 19th, referencing the date June 19th, commemorating the day in 1865 when Union troops finally occupied Texas and enforced the end of slavery. And this was over 2 years after Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, marking it a pivotal moment in American history. Now, why exactly was there such a delay on emancipation in Texas in the first place? This was due to several reasons. The Emancipation Proclamation issued by President Lincoln in 1863 declared freedom for enslaved people in states that were in rebellion against the Union, such as Texas. However, it was often hard to enforce emancipation during the war. This is critical to understanding why slavery effectively continued in Texas until 1865 despite the proclamation. Also, the surrender of Texas was quite complex during the Civil War. Since many Texans still resisted the Union and the federal government's authority even after Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered at the Appomattox Courthouse on April 9, 1865. Then, the size and remote location of Texas, coupled with ongoing resistance from slaveholders and the absence of significant Union forces, further delayed the news of the end of the Civil War and the changes that came with it. That meant unnecessary ongoing suffering for the enslaved in Texas. Instead, it took until June 19th of that same year when Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas with federal troops and issued the General Order No. 3, publicly announcing the enforcement of the Emancipation Proclamation and that slavery in Texas and the rest of the U.S. was officially illegal. And that is why Emancipation Day is celebrated in June 19th instead of the day the proclamation was actually signed or the day the Civil War ended. But even after all of this, Texas was not the last state to abolish slavery. The last states to officially enforce slavery abolition were Delaware, Kentucky, and Mississippi. In fact, Mississippi officially abolished slavery as late as 2013, although they had unofficially done so some years before that. Let me know in the comments if you know when that was exactly. So even after the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation, Delaware, Kentucky, and Mississippi resisted efforts to end the practice by initially rejecting the 13th Amendment. Sadly, it took them many more decades to officially ratify the amendment. And thankfully, this didn't affect the amendment's ratification, which happened in December 1865, which made the slavery institution illegal in the entire United States and territories. So as you can see, Juneteenth, or Emancipation Day, goes beyond a mere history lesson. It serves as a reminder of the long, painful, and arduous struggle toward freedom and equality in the US and even beyond. So now that we've reviewed a little bit about the end of slavery in the US, let's talk about the practice of slavery itself. Why was this inhumane institution allowed and normalized in the first place? Please keep in mind that I will be and have been summarizing the subject in this video, so I encourage you to also continue your own research, since there are so many things I haven't talked about, such as the fact that even after emancipation, it took a few years for Black Americans to even be considered Americans and have citizenship, etc. So I invite you to always do your own research as well and expand your knowledge. Slavery has been a grim part of human civilization for thousands of years, transcending cultures and continents. Ancient civilizations like Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, Rome, and West and Central Africa all practiced slavery, often based on death, war, conquest, or punishment for crimes. Unlike race-based slavery, these systems sometimes allowed pathways for freedom and integration into society. However, the old ways of slavery changed dramatically with the transatlantic slave trade. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, more than 12 million sub-Saharan Africans were forcibly taken from their tribes and transported across the Atlantic to the Americas. The Portuguese were the pioneers in initiating the transatlantic slave trade. As early as the mid-15th century, they began capturing and trading enslaved Africans, primarily working them on sugar plantations on islands such as Madeira, the Azores, and São Tomé. Then, the Spanish were the first ones to bring African slaves directly to the Americas, transporting them to the Caribbean islands and parts of Central and South America by the early 1500s. This trade was driven by European colonial powers seeking labor for plantations and mining. European powers exploited pre-existing African trade networks and rivalries, trading goods like firearms and rum in exchange for captives provided by African middlemen. And unlike pre-existing forms of slavery, the transatlantic slave trade was race-based and also hereditary, with enslaved people and their descendants regarded simply as property with no legal rights. All this paved the way for a legacy of racial discrimination that still pervades modern society in the New World today. It is also worth noting that even though most slaves were Black Africans, white indentured servants and natives were also enslaved, especially during the early stages of the slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade forcibly displaced an estimate of 12.5 million Africans, with countless more dying during raids, forced marches, or the horrific Middle Passage across the Atlantic. By the way, the exact number of people transported in slave ships is still subject to ongoing research. While enslaved Africans were subjected to brutal treatment and systematic dehumanization, their enforced labor created enormous wealth for European nations and colonies, laying the foundation for modern capitalism. In the United States, slavery became deeply entrenched in the Southern economy, where slaves cultivated cotton, tobacco, and other cash crops. The institution dictated every aspect of life, with laws and societal norms built around maintaining the subjugation of Black people. And lastly, as you already know, the 19th century saw growing tensions between abolitionists and pro-slavery factions, culminating in the Civil War. And that brings us back to Juneteenth and the end of the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation that we've already discussed at the beginning of our video. Now let's talk about how Juneteenth is celebrated as a holiday. The first Juneteenth celebrations started in 1866 as African American communities in Texas gathered to commemorate their freedom with prayers, meetings, and feasts. They would also sing hymns and read the Emancipation Proclamation. These early celebrations provided an opportunity for newly freed people to reflect on their struggles and their newfound hope for a better life. As Black Americans migrated from Texas to other parts of the United States, they brought Juneteenth with them, gradually spreading its observance. However, Black Americans couldn't catch a break, as celebrations were often impeded by segregation laws and social discrimination in the 20th century. Despite this, Juneteenth persisted as a testament to African American resilience and a symbol of struggle for the human right of freedom. Over the years, Juneteenth gained wider recognition. It was declared an official state holiday in Texas in 1980 and gradually gained recognition in many other states. The broader push for national awareness for Juneteenth culminated when it became a federal holiday in June 2021. Today, Juneteenth is celebrated not only by African American communities, but also by individuals of all backgrounds. Festivities include parades, educational events, music, food, festivals, and public readings of historical texts. You can partake in Juneteenth celebrations with your friends by participating in local events, studying history, supporting Black-owned businesses, and advocating for all racial equality. Festivities can change every year, so you should look up updated information online about events at or near your city to celebrate Juneteenth. And always remember that it's not just about the celebration, but also about remembering how we got here and how we can actively contribute to a more equitable and peaceful world. So thank you for watching, and see you in my next video.